The tires of the matte black Rolls-Royce crunched softly against the gravel of the long, winding driveway in Malibu. David Thompson, the CEO of an $8 billion tech empire, cut the engine, letting the heavy silence of the estate wash over him. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in Tokyo, closing a merger. But after finishing the deal early, all he wanted was to surprise his family. He smiled, looking at the gift bag in the passenger seat, containing a vintage vinyl record for his mother, Ruth. She was the woman who had adopted him when he was a 9-year-old orphan with nothing, and today he wanted to thank her. David decided to skip the grand front entrance and sneak in through the side door near the kitchen to catch them off guard. But as he reached for the handle, his smile vanished. A voice cut through the air, sharp and jagged. It was his wife, Isabella, but she wasn't speaking with love. She was screaming. David froze, his heart hammering against his ribs as he heard the words that would change his life forever. "I told you to scrub the grout, not just wipe it. Do I have to teach you everything?" David pushed the door open just an inch, and his blood ran cold. There, on her knees, wearing a dirty gray maid's uniform, was his 67-year-old mother. She was scrubbing the floor with trembling hands, while Isabella stood over her sipping white wine. Isabella thought she was the queen of the castle, disciplining a servant. She had no idea that the king had just returned home, and he was watching every single move.
David stood in the shadows of the hallway, his hand gripping the doorframe so hard his knuckles turned white. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to burst into the room, to tear the scrub brush from his mother's swollen hands, and to throw Isabella out onto the street. But David hadn't built a global empire by acting on impulse. He had built it by being a strategist, by analyzing his enemies before destroying them. He forced himself to stay hidden, watching the heartbreaking scene unfold before him. As he looked at Ruth, struggling to stand up on her bad knees, a wave of memories hit him with the force of a physical blow. He remembered Chicago 30 years ago. He remembered the freezing cold apartment where the heating barely worked. Ruth wasn't his biological mother, but she was the only mother who had ever mattered. When the state placed him in her care, she was a retired nurse living on a meager pension. Yet she never complained. David remembered the nights she worked secret double shifts at the hospital, coming home with swollen feet and exhausted eyes just to put food on the table. He remembered the day he found her crying quietly in her bedroom because she had sold her late husband's gold wedding ring. She had sold the only piece of jewelry she owned to pay for David's first computer and coding classes. She had starved herself so he could feast. She had given up her dignity so he could have a destiny. She used to tell him, "Baby, one day you're going to be big and you're going to change the world, but never let the world change your heart." Now David looked at the woman who had made him a king. She looked small. She looked broken. And standing above her was Isabella. Isabella, who had been born into wealth, who had never worked a day in her life, and who David had foolishly believed was a kind, philanthropic soul. He realized now that it was all a mask. He watched as Isabella poured herself another glass of expensive Chardonnay, wine paid for by David's hard work, and kicked the bucket of dirty water closer to Ruth. "You missed a spot near the fridge, Ruth," Isabella sneered. "And honestly, you smell like the basement. After you finish this, go downstairs and stay there. My friends are coming over for cocktails, and I don't want you embarrassing me." David felt a tear roll down his cheek, hot and angry. The basement. She was making his mother live in the basement. He had bought this $20 million mansion specifically so Ruth could live in the luxury guest wing with the ocean view. He had sent thousands of dollars a month for her care while he was traveling. Where had that money gone? Why was his mother wearing a uniform? The realization settled in David's gut like heavy lead. This wasn't a one-time event. This was a system, a systematic dismantling of a human being. Isabella wasn't just mean, she was calculating. She had waited until David was across the world to turn his mother into a slave. She had isolated her, stripped her of her clothes, her dignity, and her voice. David quietly let the door close. He didn't enter the kitchen. He didn't say a word. He turned around and walked silently toward his private office on the other side of the house. The loving husband who had walked up the driveway with gifts was gone. In his place was the ruthless CEO who destroyed competitors for breakfast. Isabella wanted to play a game of power. She had no idea she had just challenged the Grand Master.
David locked the heavy oak door of his soundproof office and sat down at his desk. He didn't turn on the lights. The only illumination came from the 3 massive monitors humming to life in front of him. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a coder, a hacker at heart. He pulled up the back end of the mansion's smart home system. He typed in his administrative overrides and accessed the security cloud. "Show me the last 30 days," he whispered to the empty room. The screens filled with hundreds of video files. What he saw over the next 3 hours made him physically ill. It was a horror movie. He watched footage from 2 weeks ago, seeing Isabella force Ruth to eat cold leftovers on a paper plate while sitting on the floor, while Isabella dined on steak at the table just a few feet away. He watched another clip where Isabella turned off the heating in the basement during a storm, leaving Ruth shivering under thin blankets while the rest of the house was warm. He saw Isabella intercepting mail, throwing away letters from Ruth's old friends, isolating her completely from the outside world. But the digital trail didn't stop at the cameras. David accessed the family's shared cloud account and found a folder Isabella thought was private. Inside were scanned documents. He opened them and felt his blood freeze. It was a petition for involuntary guardianship. Isabella had hired a corrupt doctor to sign a false affidavit stating that Ruth was suffering from severe dementia and violent outbursts. The plan was clear. She was going to have Ruth declared legally insane, lock her away in a state facility, and then, as her legal guardian, Isabella would gain control of the $10 million trust fund David had set up for Ruth. It was embezzlement, it was fraud, it was evil. David then found the smoking gun, a WhatsApp group chat named Malibu Elite Wives. He scrolled through months of messages. It was a feed of pure venom. Isabella had been posting photos of Ruth scrubbing toilets and mopping floors for her friends' amusement. One message from Isabella read, "The old hag is finally learning her place. I flushed her heart medication today. Let's see how long she lasts without it." David stopped breathing for a second. Attempted murder. She was tampering with his mother's medication. His hand hovered over the phone to call the police immediately. He could have them here in 5 minutes. He could have her in handcuffs tonight. But then he stopped. If he called the police now, Isabella would play the victim. She would use that fake doctor's note. She would claim Ruth was crazy and that the Maid uniform was just a delusion. She would get a lawyer, get bail, and spin the narrative. No, that wasn't enough. David wanted total destruction. He wanted to strip her of her reputation, her money, her friends, and her freedom all at once. He needed a stage. He looked at the calendar on his desk. Tomorrow night was Friday, the annual Thorn Foundation Charity Gala. It was the biggest social event of the season, hosted right here in the mansion's ballroom. All of Isabella's rich friends would be there. The press would be there. It was the perfect trap. David picked up his phone and dialed a number. It wasn't the police. It was his head of security. "Marcus, I need a team here in 1 hour. Forensic accountants and a tech crew. We are going to wire this house for sound and video like it's the Pentagon. And find me the best divorce lawyer in the state who works on weekends." When Isabella walked into the office an hour later to find David, he spun around in his chair, hiding the screens. She smiled, that fake, dazzling smile. "David, honey, you're home early." She rushed to hug him, smelling of expensive perfume and lies. David hugged her back, his body stiff. "I missed you," she cooed. "How was Japan?" David looked into her eyes that hid a monster, and smiled a cold, dangerous smile. "It was enlightening," he said. "I learned that you have to watch your investments very closely." Isabella laughed, thinking he was talking about business. She had no idea she was the investment he was about to liquidate.
The crystal ballroom of the Thompson estate was a sea of diamonds, tuxedos, and champagne. It was Friday night, and the charity gala was in full swing. Isabella was in her element. She wore a $40,000 custom emerald gown, holding court in the center of the room with her friends from the WhatsApp group. She looked radiant, the picture of the perfect philanthropic wife. She leaned in to whisper to her friend Jennifer, "The old baggage leaves tomorrow morning. The van is coming at 8 a.m. By Monday, the trust fund is mine." They clinked their glasses, laughing at their victory. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight hit the stage. A voice boomed over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your hostess, the heart of this foundation, Isabella Thompson." The crowd erupted in applause as Isabella glided up the stairs to the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces, politicians, investors, the elite of Los Angeles. She took a deep breath, ready to deliver her rehearsed speech about kindness and care. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Tonight is about family. It's about protecting those who cannot protect themselves, because when we love someone, we treat them with dignity." From the back of the room, standing in the shadows of the tech booth, David gave a sharp nod to his security team. "Cut it," he ordered. A harsh screech of static tore through the speakers, making the guests cover their ears. The massive 20-foot 4K LED screen behind Isabella, which was displaying the foundation's logo, flickered and went black. Isabella laughed nervously, tapping the microphone. "Oh, a little technical difficulty. Even billions in tech can't fix a glitch, right, honey?" She waved at David, but David didn't wave back. He walked out of the shadows and onto the stage. He didn't look at her. He took the microphone from her hand. "Actually, Isabella," he said, his voice booming through the silent hall, "the technology is working perfectly. I thought it was time the donors saw exactly where their money and your so-called patience really goes." He snapped his fingers. The giant screen roared to life behind them, but it wasn't a charity video. The entire ballroom gasped in collective horror. On the screen, in high-definition video, everyone saw Isabella kicking a bucket of dirty water onto Ruth's feet. The audio was crystal clear. "You missed a spot, you useless drain on resources," the digital Isabella screamed. On stage, the real Isabella went pale. She lunged for David. "Turn it off, it's a deepfake, he's crazy." But David pushed her away effortlessly. "I'm not crazy, Isabella. I'm just observant." The screen shifted again. Now it was a slideshow of the WhatsApp group messages. The text was 10 feet tall. "I flushed her heart meds today," read one message. "My dad finally died. Time for a vacation," read another from her friend Jennifer in the front row. The room erupted in chaos. Flashbulbs from the paparazzi went off like a lightning storm, capturing every second of the exposure. Jennifer and the other friends tried to run for the exit, but security guards blocked the doors. "This is private," Isabella screamed, tears of panic streaming down her face. "You can't do this. You're ruining my reputation." David looked at her with zero sympathy. "You ruined your own reputation the moment you decided to abuse my mother." He pulled a folded paper from his tuxedo pocket. "This is a violation of our prenuptial agreement, specifically the clause regarding moral turpitude and abuse. You leave this marriage with nothing. No alimony, no settlements, no house. And one more thing." David pointed to the back of the room. The heavy double doors swung open. 2 federal agents marched in, followed by a woman in a stunning royal blue gown. It was Ruth. She wasn't wearing a maid's uniform. She looked like a queen. She walked up the stairs, standing tall next to her son.
Isabella fell to her knees, grabbing Ruth's dress. "Ruth, please, tell them. I was just stressed. We can fix this." Ruth looked down at the woman who had tormented her for months. She didn't shout. She simply leaned into the microphone and said, "You tried to make me feel small, child. You tried to erase me. But you forgot one thing. You can't break the woman who built the man who built this empire."
1 year later, the sun shined brightly over the South Bronx, the neighborhood where David and Ruth had once struggled to survive. But today, the block looked different. A massive crowd had gathered in front of a gleaming new building made of glass and steel. Above the entrance, bold silver letters read, "The Ruth Williams Innovation Center." David stood at the podium, but he wasn't the center of attention. All eyes were on Ruth. She looked 10 years younger. Her arthritis was being managed by the best specialists in the world. Her skin glowed with health, and she wore a tailored cream suit that radiated elegance. "When I was a boy," David spoke into the microphone, his voice thick with pride, "my mother scrubbed floors so I could learn to code. She sacrificed her dignity to buy my future. She starved so I could eat. Today, we return the favor. This center will provide free coding classes, meals, and housing to 5,000 underprivileged children every year." The crowd erupted in cheers. Ruth stepped forward to cut the ribbon. She wasn't holding a scrub brush anymore. She was holding giant ceremonial scissors. Flashbulbs popped, not to expose her shame, but to celebrate her glory. She looked at David, and in her eyes, he saw the same fierce love that had saved him 30 years ago. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, in a dingy roadside diner in rural Pennsylvania, a waitress with tired eyes and chipped nail polish wiped down a greasy counter. It was Isabella. Her hair was frizzy, the expensive highlights long grown out. She wore a stained polyester uniform, a cruel, poetic echo of the maid's uniform she had once forced Ruth to wear. "Hey, coffee, table 4, the manager barked at her from the kitchen. "I'm coming," Isabella muttered, her voice devoid of its old arrogance. She wiped her hands on her apron and glanced up at the small television mounted in the corner of the diner. It was tuned to the national news. "Tech mogul David Thompson honors his mother with a $50 million donation," the reporter announced. Isabella froze. She watched Ruth on the screen, laughing, hugging children, looking loved and powerful. She watched David, looking happier than he ever had with her. Isabella gripped the counter until her knuckles turned white. She had possessed everything. She had the mansion, the money, the status, but she had traded it all for cruelty. She had underestimated the bond between a mother and a son, and it had cost her everything. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but there was no one there to wipe it away. As the screen faded to black, the lesson was clear for the world to see. Money can buy mansions, lawyers, and silence, but it cannot buy loyalty, and it certainly cannot protect you from the wrath of a child who watched their parents sacrifice everything for them. David and Ruth proved that true power isn't about controlling people. It's about protecting the people you love. And sometimes the best revenge isn't just surviving. It's thriving while the people who tried to bury you have to watch from the sidelines.